Hello, Garland Nixon, and we are hanging out with Peter Erickson. He's the co-host of Conversations Among the Ruins. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon, hanging out with Peter Erickson. He has a great channel with his son, Conversations Among the Ruins. I'm happy to say that I was one of the early fans of the channel. I think they had like 8 or 10,000 people when I started watching. I'm like, man, this is great. I'm getting addicted to this channel. How many people do you have? How many subscribers you guys have now?
Yeah, last I checked, it was 50,000.
Wow,
Yeah.
Wow, that's serious.
Right.
That's a good sized channel.
Yeah, well, I I have trouble believing that this has really happened, but here we are.
Yeah, it's interesting because you start off doing a channel and you do it just because you have something to say. You know what I mean? Like you see all this crap going on around you and you're like, I need to comment on this, and you start commenting on that. And then before you realize it, there are people saying, you know what, I want to hear I want to hear what you have to say. And it feels great.
Right. Yeah, it really, it comes down to it. I'm sure it's true for you and everybody else. It doesn't matter if there are 5 people listening, and that's the way it started out, like with 5, 6 people listening, or 10 or 20,000, whatever it might be. It's we're just having a conversation. I'm not thinking about the viewers out there and how many they are. It's something that we really want to talk about. It's been good for us, and fortunately, it appears to be good for other people too.
It's great. People need that. You know what? I think another part of it is what we have is a conversation amongst more regular people. Some of us may have our own unique experiences and histories and background, but everybody you meet, whether it's somebody says, I grew up on a farm and we milked the cows and did this, or someone that says, I grew up in the poorest of the ghetto in the city, or I've talked to people who I was talking to a guy and, the guy was pretty well off. And he was saying, I grew up in like Alabama. And he says, we didn't have a road. We had a path that led back to our house. And I had no idea, but he told me about it, what have you. And literally hunting and eating the things that his dad shot. That's what they had for dinner. Right. And you understand, what you understand? A person like that is going to have a different perspective on guns than someone who grew up in the city, and a gun was something that people got shot with. You're more of like,
I know exactly what you're talking about. Well, I grew up in Berkeley, California, which is very, very anti-gun. So I grew up with this real fear of guns, and in general, I don't want to have anything to do with these. But then about 25 years ago, we moved out to rural Tennessee, up in the plateau, very, very, kind of hillbilly country, and everybody loves their guns out there. So Charlie grew up among gun lovers, and he got to like guns. And I said, hey, I know what you guys are good people. I know that it's nothing wrong. I had a very different experience. So I'll respect you, but just, don't expect me to go out there to the range and shoot with you.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So let's get to talking. I think I listened to you, and I think you were where I was. And that was, rationally speaking, it doesn't make sense for the U.S. to attack because, when you weigh it out, I got everything to lose. If I'm Donald Trump, or if I'm the U.S. people running it, I got everything to lose. And what do I gain? Even if I bomb them, I'm still not going to change the government. I'm not going to do this. And when do I stop? Once I start bombing them and they shoot, how do I even know when I won? What is my ultimate goal here? It made no sense, but this empire in itself is not rational. So we knew it was a possibility. Right now, it seems like things are leaning towards the direction that both of us thought. Where are you on the whole Iran perspective?
Maybe I'm slightly more hopeful than I was a couple days ago, but not much. What we had recently was, I think we have to say, at least it appears to be. You never know; they may be putting on a show, but it appears to be a U.S. climb down because this is what Reuters reported in Axios. Essentially, the U.S. delivered these ultimatums, and they told them, okay, well, it's this or nothing. And the Iranians kind of shrugged their shoulders, said, okay, then nothing. And apparently, according to a different U.S. official, it's like, we didn't expect that answer. And now, okay, so they apparently, from what I understand, they have agreed actually to the Iranian demands, okay, that we don't talk about the missiles, we don't talk about their allies. It's going to be about the nuclear program. And we're going to do it in Oman. We're not going to do it in Turkey. So it looks like, maybe the U.S. climbed down. But again, I think there's every reason to be very, very, let's say, unsure of U.S. intentions. Is this another cloak for another secret attack? Or is it just like they're just so damn incompetent that they're going to get going and then they're going to put down these new ultimatums and blow up the talks again? There's Netanyahu and the Israelis saying, no way, you guys can't do that. It's got to be missiles or nothing. We don't care about the damn nuclear program anymore. We want we want to get, and if you don't force them to reduce their missile arsenal, we're going to attack them. That again has been reported by Israeli media, Channel 14. So it's it's maybe looking a little bit better. I think it's clear that I at least I get the sense, I strongly suspect that Trump went into this without thinking things through. He realized he thought he was going to do something spectacular, going to help the protesters, but when he got there, that whole thing had been shut down. Okay, that didn't work out, but we'll do something really neat. We'll have send in our I don't know, Navy SEALs or whatever, and do something, that'll please the folks back home. And then I'll just steam on back and proclaim some great victory. But then he started talking to people and they say, that doesn't work. That's not going to work. If you do this, we may have a huge war on our hands, sunk ships, a shutdown Strait of Hormuz. And that's not going to be good for you, Mr. President. And he's got enough sense to kind of understand about opinion polls and what looks good to his base. And so but the thing, he's got himself kind of painted himself into a corner. I don't know if he's going to get out of it.
Yeah, it's almost like did you ever see the movie No Country for Old Men?
Yeah, I did.
When the guy walks into the crazy guy, Jagurch or whatever his name, Antoine, the psychopath guy, who was an absolute tremendous actor. He was unbelievable. But he goes in to flip a coin with the guy, and the guy's like, "What are we flipping for?" And he's basically says, "Everything, right?" Like it's for everything. And you took that he's a sociopath. You took that to mean he's going to kill a guy if he loses, right?
Right.
And it's like, that's Trump. It's like if he was into the Pentagon, well, what are we gambling with? Everything. You're gambling with everything. If you start shooting at them, if they do what they said they were going to do, and they target all of our ships with anti-ship missiles, some of those are pretty nasty missiles. And some of our ships are likely to get hit, and one or more could likely get sunk, maybe a bunch of them. They got torpedoes, they got subs, they got anti-shipping missiles, they got our bases are sitting ducks. We could get hurt real bad, and they could shut the Straits of Hormuz down, which could just wipe our economy, which, might I say, our economy right now has one foot in the grave and the other on a patch of ice. So you're gambling with everything, because if Trump says go and they fire, and an hour later there's somebody with a somber face on CNN, we regret to inform you that 3 American ships have been hit. There are up to 900 sailors are missing, and we're waiting for more information now. Several bases have been hit. We understand there's tremendous amount of casualties, and they're still under fire. We'll update you. Now, at that point, he might as well pack his bags and leave the White House. He's finished if he does that.
I think so. Yeah, but my fear is that in the short term, there's going to be a huge emotional reaction, both within the administration and actually among much of the American people. And they say, sink our ships, how dare they? And it'll be a rally around the flag and, new bombing runs and et cetera, et cetera. But eventually, when the dust settles, people are going to stop and ask, why were we there? Because they haven't really, it's not clear why we are. That's the thing, is that typically you come up with some sort of pretext. weapons of mass destruction, whatever. You work on it and you pound it into everybody's brains, and they say, "Oh yeah, weapons of mass destruction. We got to do this. We got to do this." But that hasn't happened. It was protesters, then it was a nuclear program. But I thought you obliterated that. Why are you there? Why did those hundreds of American soldiers die? Why did those ships go to the bottom? I think in the end, if he goes down that route, he is going to pay the cost. Yeah.
And we can't forget this. We're in election season.
Mm-hmm.
To say, I don't think Donald Trump would lose the midterms, because I don't think he'd be president during the midterm. So I don't think he'd have opportunity to lose the midterm. What they have like 70% of Americans are 60 or 70% are in opposition to it. And, whenever the U.S. starts one of those imperial wars, whatever the numbers are when it starts within, a short period of time, they inversely, flip. With this, and there's something you have to take into account. In light of the Epstein thing, right? There's a strong anti-Israel sentiment going in. And I think very, very quickly you'd hear this: our soldiers are dying for Israel.
Yeah.
That would be really bad.
Yeah. No, that's right. that's what something has changed. There is, I think people's eyes have been opened and they have become much more cynical about, uses of the American military. So I think, there may be an immediate sort of bump in the polls to rally around the flag, but if the military action just didn't make any sense, that's just going to be short-lived. I remember actually even, what was it, with George Bush Sr. and that first Iraq war, he was like, his approval ratings were sky high, like 90%. Yeah. And then shortly thereafter, he lost an election. It was just like, okay, let's, wave our American flags and whatever. This is great. But then it didn't do anything for us. Get the bum out of there, So, I don't think that it's going to help. And this is especially bad because, again, there was a buildup to that Iraq war, but there hasn't really been a buildup. People are very quickly going to start asking those questions. Why are we there? And a lot of people are going to start saying online, Israel and whatever. And it could go south very quickly for Trump and his people.
There's been a build down because you're going to do this immediately after the Epstein files hit. You know what I mean? And rather than a build up, when people are questioning, there's a crisis of legitimacy for the ruling elite. People are saying, you're not legitimate to rule over us. You people are degenerates. And they are degenerates. It's pretty obvious. But they're saying, we have evidence that you're degenerates. So you have a crisis of legitimacy with the political class and the ruling elite. And you're going to drag us into a war. And might I add, they're going to close the Straits of Hormuz. And Americans are going to go, okay, we're in a war. Let me go to the, holy moly, it's $9 a gallon. Oh, now that will get you, the guillotines will start at $9 a gallon. You're facing guillotines.
Right. No, that's right. Again, generally U.S. voters don't vote on the basis of foreign policy, but when something hits their pocketbooks, they will. That does affect their vote. And that's going to happen in this case. I think it's very unlikely that we'll come out economically unscathed.
Well, the other part of it is this too. We're just looking for a straw to break the camel's back. When you have a extremely weak and questionable economy right now, which ours is teetering on the edge. What was the jobs reports was like 20,000 jobbers or something is the next one. That's not even enough to even say there were, in other words, no jobs, because, they have to finagle the numbers to squeeze 20,000 out of zero. Okay. So the economy is, for all intents and purposes, really has been in recession for a while. Anytime you've got 6 tech companies pouring $500 billion of AI that they've been given to them by the U.S. government into the economy, and that's the only thing that technically says you're not in a recession. You're in a recession already. And we got a crypto crash. We've got precious metals crash. The economy is teetering on the edge, and if you smack it with an oil crisis, that's it. Our economy would collapse into something really ugly, I think.
Yeah, no, it's very fragile, and again, the debt is just at astronomical levels. The deficit is just so big that people have stopped talking about it, because it's like, that number is so big, I don't even know what that means anymore. Before, we could talk about it. Hey, this is a problem. But now it's so huge that nobody even has a solution. And we're just kind of hoping if we look the other way, or if we bury our head in the sand, it'll somehow disappear. But obviously it's not. We're on an unsustainable trajectory. Yeah, it's like you mentioned, it was that this AI boom is which kept us from going over the edge, but that's gonna fall apart. All these booms do, they always end in busts. And I think this time we're in for a very hard landing. There's something different about the economy now, very different than in the past. If you go back to 2008, 2009, that huge financial crisis, it was something that started here, because of these mortgage-backed securities. It was a bubble that popped in the U.S. economy. But what happens? I was very naive, back then, and say, oh, people are going to get out of the dollar. The opposite thing happened. It's like the whole world went rushing into the dollar, and they ended up actually just enabling us to climb out of that pit. They funded, our revival, and kept us going for for many years thereafter. But we have seen something change. That is, why was that? It's because the dollar was the world's reserve currency. And in general, there's a sense that, when in doubt, whenever there's a crisis, even if the crisis came out of the US, you go to the US because that's the one place that's really solid. That's the one mountain that's never going to fall. Now that faith is gone. And I think it's in large part because of, recent administrations, the crazy people that we've, the corpse of Joe Biden followed by this madman. But most importantly, I think the war in Ukraine, the attempt to crash the ruble and cut off the Russian economy from the world economy, it failed. And other countries saw that happen. They saw the frozen assets, and they say, wait a second, the dollar doesn't look like such a safe place anymore. So we've seen in recent times, actually, there's like when Trump does something particularly, reckless, like he did his Liberation Day or whatever, there's an immediate rush out of the dollar, out of all forms of the dollar, the stock market, the bond market, and everything. And then, Trump sees that, or his Treasury Secretary sees that and says, Mr. President, you got to stop that quickly. The whole thing's going to crash. And so he reverses himself, and then things settle down. But it shows you that we're in a very different place. So that if we have a crash, and we will, at some point, and it could be soon, it could be sparked by this war that looks like it's probably, very likely going to happen. We're not going to be given that helping hand to get out of the pit that we did last time. This time we're going to fall in the pit, and then we're going to have to struggle. We're on our own, because I don't see the world, rushing to the dollar the way they have in the past.
And you have kids. I have a daughter, and I can say, growing up, raising my daughter, I would always try. You try to teach your kids how to make decisions. And one of the things I used to always, drive home to her: if you're making a big decision, try to imagine what the worst possible outcome could be, and ask yourself, am I ready for that? You know what I mean? Some kids, let's get in the car and go for a ride and drink. Think to yourself, what's the worst possible thing that could happen? And ask them, I don't want that to happen. You might not want to get in that car. You try to, in high school, to get them their decision. So they're going to do stupid things, but you're hoping they don't do anything that stupid, Right. So that's what okay, here's my point. You attack Iran, worst case scenario. Have they thought out the worst case scenario? There's several really bad case scenarios that in the U.S. empire. Here's one scenario. They got some really good friends in China and Russia that seem to have been providing them with some kind of technological advice and hardware over the last couple months. They pummeled Israel fairly easily. They took some hits, their air defense. What China said was they have a big sword, and they have a great sword and a weak shield, right? Well, I think they have had some assistance in their shield. So here's my point. China and Russia may be saying to themselves, well, we may have to fight the empire. We really need to see how some of this works if the U.S. comes after it. So let's put up this and that. What happens if you have significantly underestimated your adversary, and you start punching. If they got S-400s, you better not fly anywhere near that, or you're getting shot down. You better not fly anywhere near those S-400s. They literally fire hypersonic anti-aircraft missiles. If they lock in on you, you can forget that plane's gone. You come flying in there with these B-1Bs, B-2s, whatever. What happens if they start dropping out of the sky? What happens if your planes? What happens if you say we're going to attack, and on day one you get smashed right in the face? I mean, that is it. You don't know. Oh, yes, we've got a lot of power. We went at the Houthis and had to run home with our tail between our legs. We've seen that they have very, very powerful, more than adequate surface-to-surface missiles. And we could open the door and just get our toes slammed in it on day one. And all this business about American dominance, you could get crushed. You could get really hurt on day one.
Oh, yeah, no, there's no question about it. I know it was, I can't remember which official it was, but it was an Iranian official a couple months ago, I think. Yeah, said that, we're getting S-400s from Russia. We've worked this out. Now, I don't know if they've been installed or to what extent they've been installed, if they've been integrated into other systems. There are a lot of questions that we just don't know the answers to. But there is, like you say, there's a real chance that they're there and they're ready to be used. And, maybe with Russians at the controls. We just don't know. We really don't know. But there's so many things that can go wrong. Planes could be shot out of the sky, but we do know that they do have a lot of anti-ship missiles, and so ships could be sunk. And they have a huge missile arsenal. A lot of that, was never used during the 12-day war last year because they were just exchanging, fire with Israel. So they were using some of their long-range missiles. But they have a lot of short range and medium range. Those weren't useful in fighting Israel because Israel's too far away. But the thing is, if you're fighting the U.S., all of those come into play, because those U.S. bases are just a hop, skip, and a jump from Iran. There are a number of them right on the other side of the Persian Gulf, which is not very big. And then, in Iraq or whatever, those are within range of the short range and medium range. And they've got lots of those. Everybody admits it. And those are easier to move around, to hide and everything. So again, terrible things could go wrong. I know in talking about Charlie, you're just saying it's sort of like some drunk guy saying that, a drunk guy, is deciding that he's going to go across a minefield. And that's he's like, maybe he'll make it to the other side. And then we'll say, whoa, good job or whatever. But, why do that? Because like you say, there's so many things that could go wrong. You get legs blown off and whatever, and it just could end very, very badly. Maybe, just maybe, I don't think so, but just maybe he can get out of it, can do some quick in and out. I think that's what he wants to do. But apparently the Iranians have said, this is according to Alistair Crook, that the Americans actually approached him and said, okay, we'll do a symbolic strike, and then you can do a symbolic strike against us, and then we're even Steven. Okay, we'll call it quits, and then everybody can proclaim victory. And the Iranians, according to him, just said, no, we're not doing that. If you strike us, we hit back with everything we got, or we hit back real hard. So it looks like Trump got there and he thought he was going to do something. It was like Venezuela, where he got there and he's told his guys figure something out, and they figured something out. The government's still there, Venezuela's still there, but they got Maduro, and he feels good about it. I don't think the American people, by and large, are too terribly impressed. It doesn't help them, but it made him feel good. And he was hoping they could come up with some similar plan for Iran, but there isn't one. I'm sure there isn't. Maybe I'm wrong, but I really have trouble seeing it happen.
Yeah, and you're talking about, let me be blunt about it. You could lose the war. You could attack Iran and lose the war, and you could lose the war in a way that gets you ejected from the Middle East. I mean, Iran could say, it's like this, and I'd say this, and having studied self-defense over my life. If somebody attacks me, what do they say? Try to run, try to flee, get away. But if somebody attacks you, this is what my instructor always say, punch your way out of it. In other words, if somebody attacks you, right? The the inclination is, to curl up and try.
Yeah.
But what are you doing? You are hoping for mercy. If your attacker is going to show you mercy, he wouldn't have attacked you.
Right.
So what do? As soon as somebody hits you, you start throwing punches and everything you have back at them. That's your only hope. Maybe you'll stun them. Maybe you'll get in a good punch and you can get away. If you can get a handful of dirt, throw it in their eyes. If you can grab the hair, twist their hair, anything you can do, it's an immediate counterattack of the most vicious and violent that you're able. That's your only hope. So my point being this: if you are Iran, you have to say, what are we going to do if the Americans attack them? We got to hit them with everything we have as quickly and as hard as we can. Yeah. Maybe we'll win the war. Maybe they'll get hit so hard they'll back off. But what are our other options? To play footsie with them? Yeah. And hope for mercy? If they were going to show mercy, they wouldn't have attacked us. Right. If someone says, well, they may throw nukes. They may throw nukes, period. Our only hope is to hit them so hard that we knock them out. So if I'm Iran, I have so many missiles loaded up that as soon as you throw a pebble on the beach of Iran, I got every ship that is in range. I have a salvo of missiles and 100 drones heading towards every ship that's in range, and torpedoes and everything else. Every ship that is in range, anything that you have that is in range, on day one, I'm throwing everything I can. I want a stunning blow that makes you back off or feel a lot of pain. The potential is some of your bases get flattened, a bunch of your ships. I mean, there is a potential. Do you recall? This was around 2000. You may recall this. It was kind of infamous, shall we say. The U.S. did this mock war against Iran, and they brought back this general who was known as unconventional guy, and he had retired. And they put him in charge of the Iranians, and he defeated the Americans in the first day. And they fired him and brought somebody else and redid the scenario. Do you recall that? I can probably search it for you.
No, I'll have to admit that I
could search. But you see that's the. Yeah. I mean, Americans always think of the power of America. This is a regional power, and you're going to their front door. Right. They're firing from inside their airspace. Everything. You have an expeditionary force. Every single thing benefits them, and you don't even know what weapons they have.
Yeah. Well, I think that's, you're right about the likely Iranian response. And that's what the Iranians themselves have been saying. They say, no mistake about it. If you attack us, we're hitting back hard. And they've said it more than one time. They've said it again and again at the highest levels. The supreme leader and the foreign minister, Araghchi, they've all been saying it. And I think they mean it. I don't think they're bluffing. And you understand, actually, Iran has shown remarkable restraint in the past, to a point that many Iranians themselves and other supporters of Iran have been frustrated. They have tried to show themselves, they've bent over backwards to show that they are reasonable, that they want a diplomatic solution, that they do not want war, and so they have responded to previous attacks with tremendous restraint. But what they seem to have learned, what they seem to have concluded, is that that's not helping us at all. They haven't responded. They just see it as the enemy sees it as weakness. And here, what was it, just 7 or 8 months ago, they attacked us, and now they're back at our doorstep again. So are we going to show restraint this time? This doesn't make that they're going to show up every 6 months and, attack us again. We have to fight it out. We don't have a choice. They brought it to us and we have to fight. It has become existential for us. They're not only attacking us from the outside, but they've also launched these insurrections. It is an existential matter. So, yeah, it's scary, for Iran. But I think they have and they don't want war. I mean, this is a country that has shown that it does not want war. They have done everything they can to avoid it in spite of very, serious provocations over the years, assassinations and attacks and, so on and so forth, and economic warfare. And, but, you have pushed them into a corner, and they have been preparing for this. This is, you mentioned this war game back in 2000?
Millennium Challenge, 2000.
Yeah, okay, there it is. Okay, right, Millennium Challenge.
If Iran were to deploy,
but that was,
go ahead.
Okay, 2000. Okay, okay. Interesting. But they have, over the last 20 years, been preparing for a war with America. And, they understand America has certain strengths, but they also have certain weaknesses. And they have tried to, rather than they have worked to build, um, to build to their own strengths, that they have, and to defend against the American attacks by burying their bases and their launch sites, underground, deep in mountains. They have a large country too. This is one thing that people don't understand. Ukraine is a large country. It's like the size of Texas, right?
Yep.
Yeah, but um, but Iran is 3 times the size of Ukraine. And we're not talking, I'm talking about all of Ukraine, including Russian occupied. If you're just looking at Ukrainian occupied Ukraine, it's like 4 times the size. It has much more population too. So this is a country that is prepared for war. This is a country that does have, a real technological base. And this is a country that has been pushed into a corner and understands that it must fight. It's going to be that it has no choice. And just like any, a cornered animal is going to fight viciously, and it's not going to pull punches. And this is what we're going to see something really, really, I think, frightening. We're going to, I hope, I hope that Iran is able to teach the U.S. a lesson, but without suffering the consequences of, again, like you mentioned earlier, a possible nuclear attack.
It says, so this went on, and at 13,500 participants, numerous live simulated training sites was supposed to pit an Iran-like Middle East country against the U.S. military, which would have advanced technology. Okay, the war game would begin with a forced entry exercise, 80-second, blah, blah, blah. The guy was named Van Riper. He was the guy they brought in. He commanded the Red. Okay. He knew they'd be coming for him. It said he didn't, as soon as the Navy was beyond the point of no return, he hit them and hit them hard. Missiles from land-based units, civilian boats, low-flying planes tore through the fleet as explosive-laden speedboats decimated the Navy using suicide tactics. His code to initiate the attack was a coded message sent from the minarets of mosques at a call to prayer. In less than 10 minutes, the whole thing was over. And Van Riper was victorious. The impact of the opposing forces' ability to render a U.S. carrier battle group, the centerpiece of the U.S. Navy, militarily worthless, stunned most of the MCO2 participants. The shock compelled exercise planners to rig the rest of the war games. Yeah, like you'd be able to do in real. Hey, we're losing. What do you want to do? Rig the games quick.
Right.
Call the Iranians and tell them. Now, here's the interesting thing.
Yeah.
There's 2 things going on, I think, here. Number one was they were at the home team. That's number one. They've got an advantage. Number 2, so he used small speedboats. What's interesting is after that, the Iranians developed all of these speedboats that carry missiles on them. They carried these, but instead of that, now they have missile launchers on them. So they have hundreds of speedboats that have missile launchers at them. So they come at you. They're moving fast. They're hard to target, and they have air defense cover, so you can't bring in and attack them with helicopters. So now what are you going to do? You're going to have these, and I forgot how many subs they have. They have submarines now.
Right.
So now if you open it up and they say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to launch missiles from the shoreline. We're going to send high-speed boats at you. They're going to be launched missiles. We got submarines that are sending torpedoes. That's on day one. You better get the hell out of there or you're going to get sunk. Yeah. And that's my thing. The potential is there to really get smashed in the nose. Why would you want to do that?
Yeah, right. Well, right. They can saturate the defenses. Any air defense system can be overwhelmed, and it looks like they have the means to overwhelm the U.S. Air defense for the U.S. Navy. And another thing too that has to be considered is, we're talking about like the first few days, right? But what if this turns into a war of attrition? And again, you have the fleet. You're thousands of miles from home. You fired all your missiles, and then what do you do? Well, that's apparently they'd have to steam back to Diego Garcia, which is, another 1,000 miles away, and then turn around, load them up, then come back again. And but we know that U.S. missile stockpiles, especially air defense, are have been greatly depleted. In good part because of the Ukraine war.
And the Iranians know it, which means
Yeah.
they're going to do everything they can to deplete them in a few weeks. In a few weeks, your nation is out of air and won't have them for months, if not years. Your military, they could shut your military down. So again, what did we say? You're flipping the coin, Trump. What are we betting? What's on the line? Everything. Your economy is on the line. Your military capacity is on the line. Your presidency is on the line. Everything. Do you really want to see that coin in the air flipping over and over, hoping that it lands on heads?
Right. And the thing is, like, okay, if there's a huge upside, you say, okay, maybe go for broke, because if we win this war, whatever. But there's no upside to this. I mean, really, let's say, okay, just for argument's sake, I don't think this is going to happen. I don't believe it's going to happen at all. But that the U.S. succeeds and they cause regime change or a collapse of the Iranian government. Iran descends into chaos. How does that help the U.S.? I'm sorry, but I just don't see it at all. And in the end, the whole region is going to be convulsed and enter into chaos, and which eventually will come back to haunt the U.S. There's just no upside. What's the advantage of destroying another country? How does this help us?
Well, let's go here. Bahrain is 80% Shia,
right,
and it's ruled by a 20% minority of Sunni. The Saudi Arabia is 20% Sunni, and the 20% are in the oil regions and work in the oil fields. So now your local friendly Gulf states start to fall apart and start to fall into, because if it starts to fall, the Shiite clerics are going to say, well, that's it. We're going to issue the fatwa, and we're just going to have a worldwide jihad against the U.S. Well, things are not going to be happy then either. As you said, even if you win, you lose.
Yeah, right. There's it's one of these, right? The heads I win, tails you lose kind of things. Where it's just, what's the point? It's just, I don't think there's ever been a more poorly thought out, military operation. If indeed that's what it comes to, and it looks like that's what we're going to.
One might argue that Ukraine is.
Yeah, but I mean, the thing is, you could at least make the argument there, from the perspective of the neocons, is that, we could bring about the collapse of the Russian Federation and break it up. Of course, that was fantasy, and obviously they were they had deceived themselves, but they imagined that they could do that. There was, this great prize that they were going for. But I don't see the prize here. I'm sorry, I just, because Russia, at least, is a real rival, a superpower rival to the U.S. And you say, okay, we can weaken them. I think this is the thinking of some of them. And now we can turn on the Chinese, right? So from great power politics, theoretically, it ended up to be completely false, completely wrong. But at least theoretically, there was some sort of argument for it. Here, I don't see it.
Yeah, and you're not doing the fighting there. Yeah. Like, as is America now, they can exercise the Samsonite option. Oh, well, boy, it looks like Ukraine lost. Bye. See you later. Have a nice day, guys. Oh, your country's really screwed up, isn't it? You guys look cold. All right, well, we got to go. I mean, sadly, pathetic as that's really what it is.
Yeah.
You throw Iran in a cage with a bear. I mean, throw Ukraine in a cage with a bear. Then they get mauled by the bear, but you ain't in a cage.
Right.
Now, Europe is screwed. Ukraine's toast, but you walk away and you go on, and off you are to other adventures, right?
Yeah,
so you're right. This is worse. Now, let me ask you something. We got a few more minutes. The Epstein issue. Now, God knows we didn't even want to read about the stuff in it. You know what I mean? Weird. I mean, things that people said was crazy conspiracy theories. You look in there. There's pure madness in there. Here's my question to you. What I think we're seeing is a crisis of legitimacy for the ruling elite of the political class. People are reading those. I don't think they quite expected the reaction, because people are now looking at that and saying, you guys don't have a right to rule over us. you don't have a legitimate moral right to. I think there is a crisis, a true crisis of legitimacy, like I've never seen.
But Garland, don't you know that Epstein was an agent of Putin?
Yeah.
I don't know. When I saw
Christopher
that,
Steele. Did you see they rolled out Christopher
Oh yeah, they
Steele?
bought him up again.
Yeah,
right. Yeah. But it's appeared in all kinds of Western media outlets, and what was it, Donald Tusk, has come out and said it. It just, I just find it embarrassing. I shouldn't. It's hard for me to believe that people could be just so deranged. Or I think a lot of them know that it's nonsense, but alarm bells are going off and say, hey, this is really hurting us. Let's see, what do we do? What's our playbook? Blame it on the Russians, so, and I can't see it working with all. It's only going to work with those people who already believe that, that 5% of the population or whatever that thinks the Russians are behind everything. But the rest of us, I think, are going to look at that and say, I don't see, this is not making any sense. Putin's not showing up at Epstein's residence. It's, Yehu Barak, again and again and again. It does definitely contribute to the crisis of legitimacy. I think there's no question about it, which has become really very severe. I mean, again, all these presidents, the leaders of all these countries have just rock bottom approval ratings. I mean, I think in the case of Macron, it's down like 11% or something. Trump was doing better. He's still doing better than most of them, but last I've heard, is down to 38%, which is, he's well underwater. And I'm sure that Epstein contributed to that. I don't think there's any question about it. So there is a definite crisis of legitimacy, but these people don't seem to have any clue as to how to get out of it. They just continue to double down on everything that they've done before and try to blame the Russians. That's, and it's just not working. It's not working.
Yeah, it is. You wonder going into the midterms, because I know people who are challenging, like Jose Vega. I know various people who are challenging people who are current members of Congress. And, I look at it and I'm thinking to myself, some of these members of Congress that have been, very loyal to AIPAC, shall we say, some of these members of Congress who, have not taken action to address, to help get the, the Epstein documents out. I think a lot of members of the Congress are going to face people who are maybe unknown, but are saying, you can't vote for these people anymore. Look at what you're dealing with. And I think so here's the thing. The potential is there for a massive turnover in Congress like we've never seen before. But go ahead.
Yeah, let's hope so. That's all I can see. I mean, one thing we are seeing for the first time ever, more and more members of Congress declaring, I'm not taking money from AIPAC. I don't ever remember that happening before. Everybody took money from AIPAC. And now, especially on the Democrat side, you have these announcements. So that is encouraging. And let's see how they do. And let's see if there are some, I'm hoping that there will be other, real alternatives, okay, not that are going to real challengers to the status quo that are going to, going to win the elections. I hope so. Again, we have seen, according to the polls, a real shift in the way that people view their government, and also especially how they view support for Israel. Those shifts are really, seismic. I mean, they're huge. And I just, this is a chance to see if that actually is going to be translated into a real change in, the political establishment, if that's going to be reflected there. And, we'll watch it closely. I hope so. Again, the other side, like AIPAC, they understand what's going on. They're fighting tooth and nail. They've been sending millions of dollars, for example, to take out Thomas Massey, as one example. And they're going to be, opening their wallet and, to a greater extent than they ever have before. And they're going to be funding all these people that, the establishment, that we hope to see go. at the same time, they're going after those people that have questioned them in different ways. They often use very, very clever strategies to undermine people. And we have seen people, I think there was, what was it, Cory Bush and somebody else, that, they had become critical of Israel and then they were out. That happened recently. And let's just hope that, the public wins against the money, that democracy actually does succeed at the ballot box this fall.
And we would have to have a Democratic Party, because the Democratic Party, let us in and we'll go after Trump, and they'll do. If you think about it, the last time they impeached Trump, it was literally he made a phone call to Zelensky and said, "I think you should look into Biden because he's crooked in Ukraine." And why did they impeach him? They said because for 2 weeks he failed to deliver weapons to Ukraine, that he was using that. So they literally impeached Donald Trump for not being a warmonger enough.
Yeah.
So when they say they're going to impeach him, I have to suspect that they'll be like, we got to impeach him. Why? Because he's a puppet for Putin or some lunacy like that.
Yeah. No, you're right. Yeah, it's just like especially in the first term, what they went after him for was actually for the one, maybe the one thing that he was right on. It just shows like, my God, there's all these reasons to hate Donald Trump, especially if you're a Democrat. There's 101 reasons, 1,001 reasons to hate Donald Trump. And you choose the one place the one position where he's right and go after him. That just tells you the corruption of the moral bankruptcy of the system. So that's why I'm hoping for real alternatives, not just a slightly different flavor, not a slightly different spin, but some real rebels. We hope that they appear and that they prove victorious. We'll see.
Yeah, and see what could happen is even in the I suspect in the presidency that you'll have some kind of disruption in that a third party person or something will run and they'll get a lot of votes and they'll mess it up, and then nobody gets to 270. And then the House of Representatives decides. And you'll get, Kamala Harris. Because the Republicans are now, let's just say the Democrats win it. Then you'll get like Kamala Harris and they'll say she's the first Black female, whatever, right? Yeah. And they'll put her in there and she's the dimmest bulb in the pack. Or you'll get the Republicans and they'll put some neocon, Lindsey Graham. Oh, we think he'd be a great guy. He stands for America. And then they'd stick Lindsey Graham in there and he'd say, attack everybody, attack Greenland, attack Russia, attack China, So that's the other problem is the system is made to continue to keep itself going too.
Right. Yeah. And that's what we've seen, not just in the US, but even more so in Europe. I don't think we have to go back over, what's happened in these different, in France and the UK and Romania and Germany and Moldova. It's just that, if there's any threat of democracy, if the people actually having their say, it's the people at the top always figure something out, just to keep things from changing and to hang on to power. That's in the name of democracy always, right? And I think, we could see the same thing happen here. I'm kind of cynical, there's a part of me that hopes against hope that yet again, those brave people will rise up and supported by, the general population, and we'll see a real revolution within the House. But I think probably we'll see more of the same. We'll just see, again, the people at the top playing games to hang on to power.
What are your thoughts on, well, before we go, we got a couple more minutes.
Yeah.
I got to ask you about the state of things in Ukraine.
Oh, yeah. Well, the lights are going out,
the night the lights went out in Georgia. Right?
Yeah. Right.
The night they hung an innocent man.
Yeah. No, it looks really, really grim. Again, I won't go into detail on what's happening on the front. The Russians continue to advance and continue to grind down, and there's been kind of a steady but slow acceleration of Russian advances on the ground. But where we've seen a real rapid acceleration is in the air, really starting from a little over a year ago. If you look at it, I saw a chart recently and it just started to really take off then. And since then, it's just been going, faster and faster and more strikes every month, more drone strikes, missile strikes, different kinds of missiles, more powerful missiles, different kinds of drones with more powerful payloads. And they are doing tremendous damage as we can see. They haven't just damaged a lot of these power plants and substations, but they have just completely obliterated some of them. And that's what the Ukrainians are saying, that it's gone. It's not like we're talking about repairs. We're going to, we'll have to rebuild entire plants. And yeah, that means civilian suffering. It's true. It's at the same time, on the one hand, there is that civilian suffering, let's not deny it. But at the same time, these strikes have shown, actually, I think, the tremendous care that the Russians have taken to avoid civilian casualties. There was a recent, I think, strike that was considered to be maybe the most powerful up to that time. We're talking about dozens and dozens of missiles and well over 400 drones. And the Ukrainians themselves said, well, 3 people were injured, and from falling debris. I mean, that tells you something. And that's generally the case. I mean, even though Zelensky and Western leaders will claim indiscriminate attacks on civilians, that's not what we're seeing. This is a very calculated attack on their energy infrastructure, logistical infrastructure, the MIC, and it's been very successful. And what it's going to do is, in the end, we're talking about, okay, the ground war is moving steadily, slowly but steadily. But in the end, it has to have an impact on the ground war, because the economic damage, first of all, from this is so huge that it's going to put a tremendous drain on Europe's resources. I mean, the U.S. has pretty much walked away from providing economic assistance, and it's up to the Europeans. And the Europeans have struggled, to put together these packages. It's not clear if it's even clear that they really have succeeded in doing that. But the need for financial assistance is going to become that much more really extreme within Ukraine because of these strikes. Because when you shut down the electrical grid, you're not just making people shiver in the dark, but you've also shut down, well, first of all, the military factories and the hidden workshops that are producing these drones, but also you're shutting down the other factories too. What remains of a Ukrainian economy is going to be greatly diminished by this, and therefore the need for more financial assistance, and that's financial assistance that the Europeans can't provide. All of that just has, a cascading effect on support for the front lines. You can't have, an army that doesn't have, an economy in the rear supporting them, of financial assistance for weapons, for food. And another aspect of this is that, again, it shuts down the logistical system because, again, the great majority of personnel and material that are sent to the front lines get there by train, and these trains depend on electricity. So you can't get them there. You can't support them. You don't have an economy. I think, well, I know we've been talking about this possibility for a while, but that, those steady advances are going to become much more rapid at some point. And it's because of the real, extensive, severe damage that this air war has done against the Ukrainian economy and energy infrastructure.
Well, and the problem is that the Ukrainian army, it does have an economy supporting it. The economy of France, Germany, England, and those economies are in deep and serious trouble as they are. So yeah, what they have now is this: the economies of France, Germany, et cetera, of the EU are not only supporting the military. There's a destitute population of millions who, I mean, let's face it, if you've got thousands and thousands of apartment buildings in various cities where the people don't have, they don't have lights, they don't have heat, and it ain't coming back on. Not this year, that's for sure, right? Some of these plants, they say, will have to be rebuilt and it could take years. So, right. And we saw those pictures, they had some workers there pretending as though they were cutting a pipe open. You ain't fixing that with a couple workers cutting a pipe. That is a complete and total rebuild of these gigantic substations. So now you're going to have people living in the dark ages, basically. You're going to have health issues. Now you've got millions of people who are unable to work, so they're unable to raise money to feed themselves. Where are they going to get food? Oh, by the way, the restaurants are closed. The stores are closed. Where are they going to get food? You've got to get food into them. You've got to get basic supplies into them. And then how are they going to keep warm? in all these apartment buildings and all these, you now have a disastrous situation on your hand. How do you say, yeah, they should just keep fighting, notwithstanding the fact that the people back home are just freezing to death and living like cavemen and cavewomen, barely.
Mhm.
And it's not an injury to their economy. The economy, it's worse than if their economy
Mhm.
stopped because they have to be fed.
Mhm. Right. Yeah. No. So it's just, um, and even before these, these most recent very damaging attacks, it was becoming increasingly clear that the Europeans just did not have the funds to actually prop up the economy as it was there. Now, it's uh, now that the Ukrainians are really desperate and need many more funds. Where are they going to come from? It, it's not going to happen. So, yeah, it's just looks very grim.
Yeah, and it appears that, in light of the fact that there were some negotiations going on wherever it was, Istanbul, who knows? I can never keep it up where the negotiations are going on. The next day they come out and they shoot some Russian general in the back, which they always do after, right? Generally, just before, during, or after the any kinds of negotiations to voice their displeasure. They
Yeah,
attack something with drones in Russia, or they do an
right.
assassination in Moscow, something to visibly demonstrate their displeasure. So as far as
Yeah.
the Russians, let's turn the rest of these lights out if they got any of them.
Yeah, yeah, no, the guy that they tried to assassinate was a deputy to the head negotiator. Um,
Exactly.
yeah, so it's just, I think actually the Ukrainians are just taking a page out of the Israeli playbook. The Israelis are known for doing this. They don't want these negotiations to go on, so they kill the negotiators, and it looks like the Ukrainians did the same thing. I don't see it how it helps them. It's just like if I were a Ukrainian, I would be looking quickly. Let's just, what was that deal that Putin was offering us? You know what? Okay, these four oblasts, and hey, sure, fine, we'll be neutral. That's great. It just, I mean, really, I mean, it makes sense. Trying to make a joke out, but it's very rational. It just makes sense from the point of view of the interests of the Ukrainian people. Just accept it. Okay, yeah, it's kind of a bitter pill to swallow, but those people in the East never really were part of the program, were they? And I think a lot of you Western Ukrainians will admit that's true. So yeah, accept it, but not this government, not the Kiev regime.
Or its backers. That's the
Yeah,
other part. Or, from I would be willing to bet like MI6 is behind these kinds of assassination attempts, etc. That basically you have some governments in Western Europe that are saying we've staked everything on here. We can't just let
yeah,
this go. And so really it's a reckless disregard for the lives of Ukrainians. They're like kidnapping victims half the time, then sent to the
yeah,
front. So we're seeing a bunch of countries that aren't even in Ukraine saying, well, we'll just go ahead and sacrifice the Ukrainians because we'd be embarrassed, we'd be run out of office, we'd look bad. We can't
right,
admit that the Ukrainian project was never about
right.
Ukraine, and it was always about overthrowing Russia.
Yeah. Well, this is kind of an old story. It's just like it's the cruel logic of being on the losing side of a war. It's just that the more you lose, the harder it is to admit your error. Because if finally, like if, for example, let's say Zelensky would give a speech, okay, we made a big mistake here. Yeah, we're losing this war. Okay, I'm going to agree to the Russian terms. And everybody say, well, wait a second, we followed you into this. And you had a much better deal, like back there in April of 2022, or you had an even better deal with Minsk. And why didn't you go accept? So you're telling us that a million or more of our, of our men have died, and our country is in ruins, and you made a mistake, huh? It's just like, what are the chances he's going to survive? He's thinking that, and yeah, right. And the European leaders, they're also very deeply implicated. It's the same kind of thing. So it's just like, the worse things get, the more you can't admit that you made a mistake. So you just double down again until it's all over, and then you try to blame somebody else.
Yeah, it gets to a point where you're so far out over your skis.
Yeah,
One time I was when I used a hovercraft pilot, right? And we were on the water and at this repair facility. I'll never forget. And my years, I did a lot of search and rescue on the bay. And when I was doing search and rescue, at one point I was a hovercraft pilot, and you couldn't really run the hovercraft out of this little pier. You had to kind of walk it along and push off the piers until you got out in an open area, because it's got a big fan on the back. It's not like a boat. You can't easily navigate. So we're walking along the piers, and I'm pushing off of this wheel, and I pushed and I pushed, and I went a little too far. And I realized, I am so far over, I don't know if I can get back. And I tried to push myself up, and I froze in the air for about a second, flash right in the water. It's like you get to a point where I might have leaned a little, and that's where they are. They've got to the point where they've leaned. How do they say to the people of France and Germany who are losing all their jobs, remember when we told you that if the Russians defeated Ukraine, they were going to continue on after us? Yeah. Well, maybe we might have been mistaken. And maybe after they defeat Ukraine, maybe after all, perhaps they won't cross the border and start heading for the English Channel. How do you do that when these people have all lost their jobs and lost everything?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And they're paying their heating bills are like 4 times what they were before. And yeah.
Yeah, I think that's where they are. That's where we are. Well, thank you very much. We've hit an hour, so I certainly appreciate it. Everybody, Conversation Among the Ruins. Oh, wait a minute. For those, if you are living under a rock and you have never seen Conversations Amongst the Ruins, holy moly, it looks like you guys have a new little round circular thingy.
Oh,
there we go. Look at this. Conversations Among the Ruins. That's right.
Right.
That's Charlie and Dad.
Isn't
that how cool is that? And they've got lots of, look at this. Holy crap. 50,000 subscribers. Man, they've come a long ways. There you go. They got lots of good stuff there. They got great thumbnails, really good stuff. You can become a channel member. So Conversations Among the Ruins, as you can see by our esteemed guests, they have really good conversations, and I don't miss one. Thanks a lot, everybody. And thank you for everyone who does the my Patreon people and Buy Me a Coffee, and everyone who helps to keep the channel going. I really appreciate it. And of course, you see my PO box. I'm trying to get back together, go back to trying to raise money to head back to Russia with Scott. So anyone who could contribute to that would be much appreciated. Thank you all. And as I said, I do have a PO box for those who use the snail mail. Thanks a lot. Share this on all your social media platforms. We're out.